To wear the crown is to live with a target on your back. In the brutal kingdom of 90s hip-hop, no one wore a heavier crown than the Notorious B.I.G. As the self-proclaimed King of New York, his reign was defined not just by classic albums and legendary flows, but by the enemies he made along the way. These are the 6 artists Biggie hated the most. Starting at number 6, we have Dr. Dre. The beef between the Notorious B.I.G. and Dr. Dre was not born of personal insults or direct lyrical warfare. Instead, it was a conflict of circumstance, a rivalry dictated by business affiliations and regional pride. Dr. Dre was a principal architect of the West Coast's musical dominance and, as a co-founder of Death Row Records, a key figure in the label that would become Bad Boy's arch-nemesis. After his legendary run with NWA, Dre partnered with the formidable Marion Suge Knight to launch Death Row, a label built in part on a shared frustration with what they perceived as the East Coast's dismissive attitude toward West Coast hip-hop. Dre's groundbreaking production on his own album The Chronic and Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style created the G-Funk sound that defined an era and established Death Row as a commercial powerhouse, directly challenging New York's long-held supremacy. The tension crystallized into open hostility at the 1995 Source Awards in New York City. The event, meant to be a celebration of hip-hop, instead became a flashpoint for the brewing coastal war. When Dr. Dre was announced as the winner of the Producer of the Year award, the predominantly East Coast audience responded with a cascade of boos. Seeing his mentor and producer being disrespected, a young Snoop Dogg stepped to the microphone and famously challenged the crowd. "The East Coast ain't got no love for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Death Row. Y'all don't love us?" In that moment, Dr. Dre, whether he desired it or not, was publicly cast as a general in the opposing army. For Biggie and the Bad Boy camp, he was no longer just a producer from California, he was a face of the rival empire. However, Dre's position within this war was far more complicated than it appeared. Unlike his partner Suge Knight and his label's fiery new star Tupac Shakur, Dre seemed to have little interest in the escalating beef. He was a musician and a businessman, not a soldier, and he viewed the growing animosity as a destructive force that was both dangerous and bad for business. While Tupac was recording vicious diss tracks, Dre was actively distancing himself from the conflict. The most definitive proof of his stance came in 1996, at the absolute height of the hostility, when he chose to collaborate with one of New York's most respected lyricists, Nas. On the track Nas Is Coming from Nas's album It Was Written, Dre didn't mince words. He openly ridiculed the rivalry, calling the entire East versus West conflict bullshit, and making it clear that artists should be working together to get paid. This collaboration was a powerful statement, a deliberate act of bridge building over a war zone his own label was helping to create. Dre's discomfort with Death Row's direction grew as Suge Knight's tactics became more violent and the label's reputation more thuggish. The constant conflict was antithetical to his focus on creating music. In March 1996, just as the beef was reaching its fever pitch with Tupac's signing, Dr. Dre made his exit. He walked away from the empire he helped build to found a new label, Aftermath Entertainment. This move was the ultimate separation from the Bad Boy versus Death Row war. It was also seen as a betrayal by some within his former camp, most notably Tupac, who would later deride Dre on record for his departure. For Biggie, Dre's status as an enemy was never about a personal vendetta. It was a matter of affiliation. Dre was a co-founder of the rival company, but his actions demonstrated that he never shared the warlike mentality of its CEO or its biggest star. His was a conflict of professional liability, not personal hatred. Moving on to number 5, we have Jeru the Damaja. Before they were rivals, they were simply two kids from Brooklyn. The conflict between Biggie and Jeru the Damaja was not born of street corners or personal slights, but from a deep ideological divide over the future of hip-hop. In their early days, they were peers and even friends. Jeru, a thoughtful lyricist from East New York, recalled hanging out with Biggie on the corner before either of them had a record deal. He remembered Biggie being a fan of his music, and in one memorable anecdote, playfully chided a young, pre-fame Biggie for his diet, telling him, "Yo, you need to stop eating all of that meat, man. You need to go vegetarian." To which Biggie humorously replied, "Yo, my name is Biggie, not Barkham." This early camaraderie underscores that their eventual beef was a matter of principle, not personal animosity. The problem, in Jeru's eyes, was Puffy. As a protege of DJ Premier and guru of Gang Starr, Jeru was a purist, dedicated to the raw boom-bap sound that defined New York hip-hop. He watched with disdain as Puffy and Bad Boy Records ushered in the shiny suit era, a period defined by glossy music videos, lavish materialism, and R&B-infused hooks designed for mass appeal. To Jeru, this wasn't an evolution, it was a corruption. He believed Puffy was sacrificing the art form's authenticity for commercial success, and he decided to make his opposition known on wax. His attack was pointed and allegorical. On his 1996 album, Wrath of the Math, the song One Day tells the story of hip-hop being personified as an individual who has been kidnapped. Jeru raps that he last saw hip-hop down at Bad Boy, where Puffy was getting him drunk and fucking his mind up. In the song's narrative, hip-hop is found wearing a Versace suit, a clear shot at Bad Boy's high fashion image. The track also name-dropped Foxy Brown and even Death Row's Suge Knight, positioning Jeru as a warrior fighting to save the culture from all commercial forces. He doubled down on the lead single, Ya Playin' Yourself. For the beat, DJ Premier deliberately sampled the same New Birth record that Biggie's crew, Junior MAFIA, had used for their smash hit, Players Anthem. Jeru and Premier flipped the celebratory sample into a scathing critique of the very lifestyle Bad Boy promoted, a direct musical subversion of their success. Biggie, whose loyalty to his friends and his label was absolute, did not take the criticism lightly. The response came on his own sophomore album, Life After Death, on a track also produced by the man caught in the middle, DJ Premier. During the recording session for Kick in the Door, Premier recalled being stunned when Biggie launched into his second verse. Looking directly at the producer, Biggie rapped, "Son, I'm surprised you run with them. I think they got cum in them, 'cause they nothing but dicks." Premier stopped the tape, asking Biggie if that's how he really felt. Biggie's reply was blunt, "I told you, I had to get back at your man." He was dissing Premier for his association with Jeru. Puffy, also in the studio, escalated the tension, declaring, "Yeah, we're coming after Jeru the Damaja too." The battle lines were drawn. This wasn't a coastal war, it was a civil war for the soul of New York hip-hop, a fight between the purist and the populist. Nas is next on our list. The Notorious B.I.G. and Nas emerged around the same time, two titans of rhyme who held each other in high regard. There are famed accounts of them freestyling together in the early days, and Biggie himself once conceded in an interview that when it came to the title of Best Lyricist, he couldn't compete with Nas. Their friendship was real enough that a collaboration was planned for a remix of Biggie's Gimme Da Loot. The session, however, never came to fruition. As Nas humorously recounted years later, he got too high on the potent weed Biggie had brought to the studio and was too zonked out to record his verse. The friendly competition began to curdle into a more serious rivalry over the unofficial but deeply coveted title of King of New York. Nas's 1994 debut, Illmatic, was hailed as a lyrical benchmark, a masterpiece of poetic street realism. But later that year, Biggie's Ready to Die achieved massive commercial success, blending raw storytelling with crossover hits. In 1995, the influential hip-hop magazine The Source put Biggie on its cover, officially crowning him the King of New York, a move that put him in direct competition with the Queensbridge Prodigy. The first subliminal shots were fired by Nas. On his 1996 sophomore album, It Was Written, the opening track, The Message, contained a line that was impossible to ignore. "There's one life, one love, so there can only be one king." In the context of the time, this was widely seen as a direct challenge to Biggie's reign, a lyrical claim to the throne. Years later, Nas would confirm that the line was indeed aimed at his Brooklyn counterpart. The tension was further stoked by outside forces when members of the Wu-Tang Clan, who were close with Nas, accused Biggie of biting the Illmatic album cover concept for Ready to Die, adding a layer of perceived disrespect to the competitive atmosphere. Biggie's response on his 1997 magnum opus, Life After Death, was sharp, confident, and dismissive. On the DJ Premier-produced track, Kick in the Door, he fired back at all his New York challengers. Lines like, "Your reign on the top was short like leprechauns," were clearly directed at Nas's claim to the throne. He went further, suggesting his rivals were not innovators but students, rapping, "It's ill when MCs used to be on cruddy shit, took home Ready to Die, listened, studied shit, now they on some money shit, successful out the blue." It was a masterful assertion of dominance, framing his own success as the new blueprint that others were now following. Despite the pointed lyrical sparring, the beef remained on wax. It was a battle for legacy, a competition between two masters of the craft to determine whose pen was mightier. The rivalry was cut short by Biggie's untimely death. In the years that followed, Nas would pay tribute to his fallen friend and rival, most notably on the song "We Will Survive," where he memorialized both Biggie and Tupac, cementing their places together as tragic heroes of the same struggle. Coming in at number 3, we have Raekwon and Ghostface Killah. The feud between the Notorious B.I.G. and the Wu-Tang Clan, specifically its most prominent storytellers, Raekwon the Chef and Ghostface Killah, was an internal New York conflict rooted in artistic pride and competing definitions of realness. Both Biggie and the Wu-Tang Clan were pioneers of the mafioso rap subgenre, painting cinematic pictures of crime, luxury, and street justice. However, they approached this shared theme from different aesthetic angles. Wu-Tang's vision, perfected on albums like Enter the Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers, and Raekwon's solo classic Only Built For, Cuban Links, was raw, gritty, and esoteric, filled with martial arts movie samples and coded slang. Biggie and Bad Boy, on the other hand, presented a more polished, accessible version of the mafioso lifestyle, one that was equally at home in the streets and on the pop charts. This difference in style led to accusations of inauthenticity. The conflict burst into the open on Raekwon's 1995 album, Only Built For, Cuban Links, on a skit titled Shark Niggies, Biters. In the unscripted conversation, Raekwon and Ghostface vent their frustrations about unoriginal rappers. "I can't stand a freaking biting-ass n***," Raekwon complains before Ghostface makes the target of their scorn clear. He laments that biting off your album cover and shit, a direct reference to the widespread belief in their circle that the baby on Biggie's Ready to Die cover was a direct copy of the childhood photo of Nas on the cover of Illmatic. Ghostface also mocks the happy-go-lucky n***, when they get on, want to pop a little champagne, a clear jab at the celebratory high-gloss image of Puffy and Bad Boy Records. For them, Biggie wasn't just creating a different style, he was diluting and co-opting a narrative they felt belonged to the grittier, less commercial side of New York hip-hop. Biggie's response was part of his broader lyrical counteroffensive on Kick in the Door. The warning, "This goes out for those that choose to use disrespectful views on the King of NY," was a blanket statement to all his local critics, including the Wu-Tang swordsman. He framed their criticism as jealousy, suggesting that while they were still on cruddy shit, he had evolved to some money shit, and they were simply studying his successful formula. The beef was a battle over ownership of the New York street narrative. Tragically, any chance for a musical reconciliation was cut short, but a personal one did occur. In multiple interviews, Ghostface Killah has recounted his first and only direct conversation with Biggie, which took place in Los Angeles just days before his murder in March 1997. Ghostface explained that he approached Biggie at a party with the intention of squashing their issues. "My intention was just to clear the air and make some music," he recalled. The encounter was brief and awkward, but respectful. They shook hands and said peace to each other. The news of Biggie's death soon after hit Ghostface hard. Raekwon later echoed this sentiment, reframing the conflict not as a street war, but as healthy competition. Taking the second spot is Suge Knight. More than any artist, the man who arguably did the most to escalate the tensions surrounding Biggie was a non-rapper, Marion Suge Knight, the imposing and feared CEO of Death Row Records. Knight was not just a record executive, he was a force of nature, a Compton native with deep ties to the Blood Street Gang, who ran his label with an iron fist and an appetite for confrontation. He co-founded Death Row with Dr. Dre, channeling a palpable West Coast resentment towards New York's perceived condescension into a billion-dollar enterprise that celebrated a defiant, unapologetically gangster ethos. For Suge, the rivalry with Bad Boy was not just business, it was personal and territorial. Suge's declaration of war came on August 3, 1995, at the Source Awards in New York City, enemy territory. While accepting an award, Knight stepped to the podium and delivered a speech that would become infamous. "Any artist out there that want to be an artist and want to stay a star," he announced to the stunned crowd, "and don't have to worry about this executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record dancing, come to Death Row." There was no doubt who he was talking about. Puffy's tendency to ad-lib and dance in his artist's music videos was his signature, and Suge had just publicly ridiculed him on his home turf. Puffy, sensing the explosive potential of the moment, chose to de-escalate. He later revealed in an interview on the Drink Champs podcast that he confronted Suge at an after-party that night. According to Puffy, Suge backed down, claiming the jab was aimed at Atlanta producer Jermaine Dupri, not him. Puffy accepted the excuse, later explaining it was a business decision to avoid a violent confrontation that he felt would have been disastrous for the culture. The conflict, however, had already moved beyond words. Just a month later, at a party in Atlanta, Suge's close friend and bodyguard, Big Jake Robles, was fatally shot following a dispute between the Death Row and Bad Boy entourages. Suge immediately and publicly accused Puffy of being involved in the murder, elevating the feud from a war of words to one of blood. This event became the justification for Suge's most consequential move. At the time, Tupac Shakur was incarcerated on abuse charges, nursing a deep-seated paranoia that Biggie and Puffy had set him up in the 1994 Quad Studios shooting. Seeing an opportunity, Suge Knight paid Tupac's $1.4 million bail in exchange for a 3-album deal with Death Row Records. In bailing out Tupac, Suge didn't just sign a superstar, he acquired a weapon. He took Tupac's raw, personal pain and weaponized it for corporate warfare. He provided the platform, the resources, and the encouragement for Tupac to unleash his fury on Bad Boy. The result was Hit 'Em Up, a track of unprecedented viciousness that took the beef to a point of no return. Suge Knight was the master manipulator, the architect of a conflict who transformed a rap rivalry into a real-world war. He successfully dismantled his business rival, but in the process, he created a storm so violent that it ultimately consumed the 2 biggest stars in the genre, leading to the downfall of his own empire. And finally, at number 1, we have Tupac Shakur. The feud between the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac Shakur remains the most tragic and defining conflict in hip-hop history. It was a story of brotherhood, betrayal, and misunderstanding, a personal fallout that was manipulated by outside forces and amplified by the media, ultimately spiraling into a national spectacle with fatal consequences. When Tupac and Biggie first met in Los Angeles in 1993, their dynamic was that of a mentor and a protege. Tupac was already a multi-platinum recording artist and a burgeoning movie star, while Biggie was a raw, hungry talent from Brooklyn, largely unknown outside of New York's underground scene. Tupac immediately recognized Biggie's immense skill and took him under his wing. He invited Biggie to his home, cooked steaks for him, and let him sleep on his couch when he was in town. More importantly, he offered guidance, schooling the younger MC on how to navigate the treacherous waters of the music industry. Their bond was palpable. They freestyled together at Madison Square Garden, and Biggie was so impressed with Tupac's movement that he even asked to become his manager. Tupac, believing in the vision of Puffy, advised him to stay with Bad Boy, telling him, "He will make you a star." It was a relationship built on mutual admiration and a shared love for the craft, making its eventual implosion all the more heartbreaking. The friendship shattered on the night of November 30th, 1994. Tupac arrived at Quad Recording Studios in Times Square to record a feature for another artist, Little Sean, a session he took to help pay his mounting legal fees. As he entered the lobby, he was ambushed by 2 armed men who ordered him to the floor. Accounts of what happened next vary. Tupac himself, in a later Vibe interview, said he hesitated and resisted, leading to him being shot 5 times and robbed of his jewelry. Upstairs, Biggie, Puffy, and other members of the Bad Boy camp were in the middle of a recording session. As a wounded Tupac was carried out of the building on a stretcher, he looked up and saw his friends looking down. In a moment that would become iconic, he gave them the middle finger, a gesture that symbolized the depth of their friendship. While recovering, and later while serving a prison sentence for a separate abuse conviction, Tupac's suspicion festered into a deep-seated paranoia. He became convinced that Biggie and Puffy, given their connections to the New York underworld figures he believed were behind the attack, must have had prior knowledge of the setup. In his mind, their failure to warn him was an unforgivable act of betrayal. He aired these explosive allegations in a now infamous prison interview with Vibe magazine in 1995, publicly accusing his former friends and setting the stage for war. While Tupac was in prison, the situation escalated dramatically. In February 1995, Bad Boy released Who Shot Ya as a B-side to Biggie's Big Papa single. The track, a menacing narrative from the perspective of a gunman, was recorded months before the Quad, according to Puffy, Biggie, and the song's producers. But the timing was catastrophic. To a wounded and paranoid Tupac, the song was a blatant and cruel taunt, a public mockery of his near-death experience. It was the point of no return. After Suge Knight secured his release from prison, Tupac, now the new star of Death Row Records, unleashed his fury. In June 1996, he dropped Hit 'Em Up, arguably the most ruthless and direct diss track ever recorded. Over the beat of a Junior Mafia song, Tupac launched a verbal assault of unparalleled viciousness. Opened with the infamous line, "That's why I f***ed your you fat mother." A direct claim that he had an affair with Biggie's estranged wife, R&B singer Faith Evans. While Evans has always denied the affair, Tupac and Suge Knight actively promoted the rumor, a deeply personal attack designed to humiliate his rival. The song continued with explicit death threats against Biggie, Puffy, and the entire Bad Boy camp, transforming a musical rivalry into a public declaration of war. In the face of this onslaught, Biggie remained publicly silent. He never released a direct, name-calling response to "Hit 'Em Up." According to his protege, Lil Cease, Biggie actively forbade anyone from Junior Mafia from retaliating on record. Cease claimed that Biggie still held out hope that their friendship could be salvaged and didn't want to escalate the conflict further. However, many believe that subliminal shots were fired on his album Life After Death. The track Long Kiss Goodnight, recorded after Tupac's death but before Biggie's, contains lines that seem to reference Tupac's shooting and prison sentence, suggesting that while Biggie avoided a public battle, he was not above a coded response. The war reached its tragic climax on September 7, 1996. After attending a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas, Tupac Shakur was shot in a drive-by while riding in a car with Suge Knight. He died from his injuries 6 days later, on September 13th. The news sent a shockwave through the hip-hop world and deeply affected Biggie. Faith Evans recalled him crying on the phone the night Tupac died, saying, "Something ain't right, Faye. That was my." The bravado of the beef had given way to fear and regret. Biggie became withdrawn, telling a journalist, "It's not worth it anymore." In the months that followed, Biggie made a conscious effort to end the war. He recorded the song Going Back to Cali, a tribute to the West Coast, and planned a promotional trip to Los Angeles to show that the beef was over. It was a fatal miscalculation. On March 9, 1997, after leaving a Vibe magazine party at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, Biggie's SUV was stopped at a red light. A black Chevrolet Impala pulled up alongside him, and an unknown assailant fired multiple shots into the vehicle, killing him instantly. He was 24 years old.